Hello and welcome to another episode of Virtual Coffee with Ashish. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we are here talking about what the heck is CI/CD. And today's episode, I've got Melissa Benoit. But before we go into it, if you're a first timer, feel free to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. That's where the audio version would appear in once we finish the audio. And if you are coming in now, just feel free to say hello. We're friendly people over here, and keep throwing your questions into the live commenting on the side, either the YouTube channel or live stream on LinkedIn. Seem to be streaming everywhere. That's all I'm saying. But without further ado, let me just bring my guest. Hi, Melissa. How are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
Good. I'm just gonna quickly check that we are live. Yes, we are. Sweet. And I need to do my traditional thing. So cheers.
Cheers.
So what are you having? Oh, you've got a Microsoft cup. That's pretty awesome. There's a
I
subtle
do.
plug there.
This is a Microsoft cup. It's ancient. It's from when they give every new hire this cup.
Oh wow, there you go. So it's probably a good segue into before we go into your history. What kind of tea are you having? Camembert, Earl Grey?
Today it's green. It's just a simple green tea. Nothing fancy.
Simple green tea. Simple green tea it is. So for people who probably haven't heard of Melissa Benoit, where I was gonna start where do you start? You have such an interesting history. I've been totally. I was gonna go look at all your online talks. Then I like, oh my god, she has such an interesting history over there as well. So for people who may not have heard from you before, what was your path into this engineering world?
Yeah. So I came from a university that really emphasized software testing as a discipline of computer science. If you know software testing, I was under Ken Kainer and Whitaker, a bunch of people who are in the testing world who know who they are. Anyway, so I went from there to Boeing for a little bit. Found that Boeing was boring. Doing software not test automation, but developing virtual systems so that people could test mission control software. Went from there to Microsoft. You see here, I started as an SDET.
Yes.
Rolled in from SDET to combined engineer / developer when they started playing with this whole combined engineering fad / universal truth now, however many years ago that was, on a product you may have heard of. It's called Bing.
Oh yeah. Of course. The search engine that I always use.
I'm sure everybody who can work for Bing definitely uses Bing all the time.
The funniest thing was when people they started paying people money to start using Bing. That was my saddest moment for Bing.
Bing rewards are great.
Yeah.
For my Xbox Live subscription with Bing rewards, it's fantastic.
Oh,
not to advertise, but
yeah. So Bing, okay, cool.
Joke is that the people who use Bing the most are Microsoft employees, so Bing is fantastic for looking up .NET. There's no better tool for looking up things about .NET than Bing, because that's the
you'll be surprised actually, because I've made friends with some people recently who are heavily into .NET, and that's actually I did not know that. So is that a thing that Bing is probably a better one?
Because they deep index to MSDN.
I'm getting a double audio. Thanks, Chris. I didn't realize I was getting a double audio. Can you hear me now, Chris? I'm just curious. Wonder if it's my end, which is double audio. Oh, it's not you, Melissa. It's just me. That's right. So don't worry. If someone can confirm, they can still hear just me once and not twice, which is really interesting. If they are listening to me twice. Anyone? Sweet. I think that we're good. I'm just trying to increase the volume over here just to make sure I am. Hello? Perfect. Cool. I think I'm all right now. But to go into we were talking about Bing, and what was after Bing?
So after Bing, I did a bunch of stuff on Bing. I shifted over to work on Cortana. So I did some work on Cortana before Cortana was named Cortana, as a part of here 2 audio fades with a slight delay. Still looks like there's still a delay.
I'm not really sure how to fix that, I guess. Audio, there's a headphone. I think I've got noise cancellation on. Not really sure, but it seems to be going all right over here. Let me just change this. I'm just gonna quickly test it.
Looks like we're still in delay.
I just played myself again, so it seems to be all right on the live stream. Yeah, that's weird. But there you go. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Pratap. Well, yeah. Hopefully, it's nothing wrong with your mic or headphone. I imagine, Chris. But let me know, man. If you want us to help you in any way, we'll definitely be keen to. But all right, this is the best joy of being on live stream, though. At least we got live feedback. Yeah, so at least as long as people can hear us, so that means people are hearing us. That's a great thing. So thank you, everyone who confirmed.
Friday night, what could go wrong?
Yeah, that's right. It's definitely something with I appreciate the crowd for as well. They definitely make us make sure that we are heard and heard appropriately. So we're at Bing. What happened? And then we went to Cortado.
Yeah, so then I went to Cortana. We shipped Windows Phone. Was part of the shipping team for Xbox One, the original one. Worked on the WebSocket.
The original one.
Yeah, the original one. I still have a white one. It's a very fancy Xbox.
Oh wow, you have one of those antique ones. That's pretty cool.
I know they're not going to give me a free one this time. It's very sad for me. We joked that was the whole reason that I went to join the Xbox team was just because I wanted to be given a free Xbox.
Oh. We could go into so many layers over there, but I'm just gonna hold myself off for my next conversation with you.
But yeah, so I went from there, and so I did a lot of deep backend engineering, and then from there I went to join a startup doing some gaming services as a platform. I was there for a little while, did some backend engineering, did all kinds of things, and that was where I started doing a lot of continuous integration and delivery. And that I'd been exposed to a lot of practices on Bing. Microsoft actually had quite modern / forward-thinking practices. We were doing DevOps. We were doing DevOps before DevOps had a name. Like we didn't know what to call it. It was just the thing we did. And so I took a lot of those practices to my startup. And then from there, I left from that startup to a bigger startup where I'm at now called Untitled. And I've continued bringing some of those practices here, right? Rolling not just testing, but security and all kinds of other good things that you need in order to be able to ship code safely and securely and quickly.
Yeah, that's awesome, because I keep thinking that, hey, if you've had a really good, interesting history, right? Microsoft, and then you've been doing, and by the way, I have huge respect for the gaming community, because I feel gaming that's the industry where everything started, even from security perspective. Like that was an era where the gaming industry had to figure out, how do we not get affected by cheat codes? Because everyone loves cheat codes. Everyone would want extra points, and they had to figure out security even before like cybersecurity was a thing, I feel. So I mean, they're the ones who are pioneering. Sorry?
Yeah, it's a hard problem.
Yes, 100%. I get surprised every time someone talks about it as well. So what is because we have the cloud audience over here, what does cloud security mean for you?
So for me, cloud security is a couple dimensions. The first one is making sure that we haven't shipped, that we've done our best effort to ensure we're not shipping insecure code, right? That insecure code doesn't even make it into our mainline branch, which is we're putting a lot of checks as early as possible. And then the second part is assuming, okay, well, we did our best, but nobody's perfect. So let's make sure that if we do ship something insecure into production, we're going to know about it before somebody else does.
Interesting. And just want to add to that layer, right? So 100% we should not be shipping any code which is not secure. And modern deployment practices have evolved quite a bit. Like I feel like it's only been a few years, but it feels like it's been there for yonks, right? But I'm curious to know from your perspective, what is when people say modern deployment practices, and they throw words like CI/CD, trunk line deployment. What are they? I mean, as a security person with some insight into this, what does it really mean for people who may not have heard this before?
Yeah, so continuous integration is the act of building and testing every single change, right? There's no such thing as, whoops, I landed my change and I accidentally made all of our code not compile, right? That doesn't happen. You may do it to yourself, but you don't do it to anybody else. Continuous delivery is making sure that every change not just compiles and passes tests, but is then deployed somewhere automatically so it can be tested. Doesn't mean production, just means it's some way that it can be tested. And continuous deployment is then every change that lands into your mainline branch is automatically deployed live to production.
Oh, so there's subtle difference, because so deployment is when it goes into production, but is there like a sequence to it?
Yeah, there is. So you start. I mean, so the sequence is in when you're certainly when you're starting implementing any of it, right? You always start with continuous integration, because there's no point trying to deploy garbage to production when you don't know anything about your garbage. It's just garbage. You don't want to deploy garbage
Yes.
faster. You want to make sure that your code compiles. Right, the step one of any quality pipeline is, does your code compile?
Yep. Yeah, 100%.
And compiled language.
Yeah, and I think to your point, it's interesting, right? Because I imagine that this large-scale integration, there are obviously clearly a lot of challenges, and we'll definitely dig into that a bit more as well. But for secure, and it's always an interesting one for me, because every time I've mentioned CI/CD, and you've mentioned this part as well, where only good code should make it to production. Like, what role does security play in your mind, and in some of these stages? Like, I mean, you can go into each one if you want, or you can just give a holistic view if you feel like.
Yeah, so security is or should be, right, a first party citizen in the whole CI pipeline, right? Because you can't ship code that doesn't compile. You can't ship code that doesn't pass tests. You shouldn't ship code that has obvious vulnerability, whether it's a vulnerable package dependency or has a static analysis issue. Like, you can't ship any of that code. It's easy to find out those things. It's not like it requires 5 PhDs and a team of 30. It's not that hard to find those things out. It's relatively fast, and so there's not really a lot of excuse in this day and age to not be checking the basics. Right? There's not a lot of value in trying to do something esoteric and look for really difficult exploits if you know for a fact that you're using a vulnerable package that's been actively being exploited in the wild right now.
Yeah, and I think I find it, to your point, like, and I'm gonna touch a few nerves for security folks over here. Does it mean in the new world we security folks have to know how to code?
They don't have to. I know plenty of security people who don't. They probably know how to run a tool, though.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Okay. Now good to know. I was gonna say, like, where do I draw the line? Because every time I mention that, we might have to be a bit more technical. And no offense to people who make diagrams, right? I make diagrams myself. Nothing wrong with it. But people sometimes take offense to the fact when I say we kind of have to be a bit more technical and have an understanding. But for people who are listening to this and they're like, okay, CI/CD, great, but what about starting off just by saying what is like a super mature model of CI/CD? Like, are we talking like multiple deployments that gets like what does that look like from your perspective? And when you say modern deployment practices, how many times are we deploying, and is still security saying the same part over there as well, or is that like a...
So an underpinning of any modern CI/CD practice is automation. Automating, I don't just mean test automation. I mean everything should be automated. As many things as possible should be automated and reliably automated and relatively quickly automated. Because the number one way you're going to kill your CI/CD efforts is if you have a lot of manual pieces that rely on a human to do something. Because humans are slow compared to a machine, right? Machines are really, really fast.
Sorry, humans.
Sorry, humans. And so the underpinning of any successful CI/CD system involves automation. It means automating your testing, automating your integration testing, automating as much of your security testing as possible, automating, your infrastructure setup and teardown if you need to. Automating, not just having alerts, but having those alerts be automated. Not just having metrics, but having those metrics be automated into alerts that route to the right people. Ideally, having rollbacks automated if possible, because there's just not time. And every second that you do a bad deployment and God forbid your site is down or you've got major functional degradation, if you're at scale, that's hundreds of thousands to millions of users being affected. And so time matters, and a human's reaction time from the time the alerts, the metrics start rolling in, can take 3 or 4 minutes if you've got a lag. To the time a human is looking at the graph and the human's pattern recognition recognizes, oh no, this is bad. And then the human goes and pulls up the page that tells them what to do, and oh no, this is bad happens. And then the human has to connect to a machine. It has to type things. Then another human has to sign off on what they're doing, right? That can take a lot of time. Whereas an automated system can go boop, 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 done. Before the human is even registered there's a problem.
So wait, it's not a sci-fi movie thing. We can actually see this happen in real life, where things just go one after the other, and it just happens automatically.
Absolutely, I've seen it happen. A lot of times they want, the biggest complaint is I hear people say, I don't want to do continuous deployment because I want to control when my rollouts happen, because I don't want one happening whenever, in the middle of an ad campaign, or in the middle, on Black Friday, or whichever, which is fine. I don't actually view that as a blocker to continuous deployment, because realistically speaking, as long as every change in your mainline branch could go live at any point in time, it doesn't really matter if each and every one literally does.
Interesting. And I'll let other folks ask this questions around this as well, but I definitely feel it's an interesting space, right? Where a lot of people feel that multiple deployments for a day is always just a startup thing. Like, you don't see this in a mature organization, but I think Microsoft and other people like that. Yeah, there you go. That's right. And no, but that's the thing though, right? Because people think that it's for them. Like, it's not for people like us, because we clearly have different problems to what those guys have, even though the scale is immense. So if I were to ask you, like, peeling a few more layers onto this, like, what are some of the building blocks? Like, someone who's listening to this maybe have one deployment every 6 months into production, or one deployment every 3 months into production. What's your recommendation for what are some of the building blocks for this? For this. Oh, actually, sorry. Before we get into this, I think that's a great question, because that would add another layer to this. There's a question from Vineet: is continuous monitoring part of CI/CD security?
It is. Absolutely, it is.
What is continuous monitoring as well?
So I don't think of it as continuous monitoring so much as monitoring.
Also, same thing. It's just all right.
Continuous monitoring usually implies that there's a machine on some end running alerts behind it, because otherwise monitoring is a human looking at a TV as it scrolls, like with tickers, or like the Matrix. So that would be non-continuous monitoring, I guess, because you don't have humans all the time.
Yes. So that's.
But there's really 4 dimensions you have to sort of think about when you're thinking about transitioning a code base over. You've got to look at your source control practices, right? How mature are your source control practices? Are you using branches? Do you have gates on your main branch? How do you make a production release? You have to look at your quality practices, right? How much automated testing do you do? Is it reliable? Does it run quickly? Does it run with every change? Does it run with every 5th change? Is it all some manual tester sitting in a back room somewhere, and you've got to wait on their unreliable reports?
Ouch.
You got to look at your deployment practices, right? How easy is it to make a deployment? Is deployment some dude taking a zip file from his machine and SSHing into 15 other machines, and that's what a deployment is? Are you containerized? Are you running Kubernetes? And finally, monitoring, right? Do you have any monitoring in place? Is it just SSHing into a machine and tailing a log file? Do you have aggregated logging? Do you have metrics? Do you have alerting on those metrics? Do you have systemic organized metrics so that you can make systemic organized alerts, or is it everybody names it whatever they feel like? So there's really, across those 4 different dimensions, there's different maturity levels, and then depending on your maturity levels, you can determine how reasonable it is to deploy with certain frequencies.
Wait, so you're saying all our problems can be solved by 4 pillars?
Basically. It's a little bit of a simplification in that those 4 pillars are massive.
Well, yeah, I'm sure there's like a lot more complexity to it. It's like me saying I know how to drive, but depending on manual, automatic, like there's complexity. But to your point, at a high level, yes. Sorry.
Yeah, you're gonna drive a semi.
Yeah, that's right. Oh my God, I definitely don't want to drive a semi. But to your point, so as long as these 4 pillars have kind of been thought of or taken care of, you should at least have the building blocks to start off your journey on doing continuous deployments or continuous integration as well. And I'm sure this goes into tools and everything. And before I dug into it, there's a question that came from Neon J. It's more like, great topic. If one was studying AppSec in a CI/CD, and is CI/CD an exercise one can practice if he or she doesn't know how to code? So can you do CI/CD without knowing how to code? Oh, that's great. Oh, where would someone start with that? I guess.
So where you can start, there's a couple different ways to start. You can start with some open source solutions on GitHub, right? That they wrote the code for you, and you can look at what they did, and you can fork their repositories. GitHub Actions, for example, is a free CI/CD system. You can go see how open source / free projects have set it up. There's a lot of trainings and tutorials on YouTube. I actually am giving a training next week at a conference, which we're teaching people how to set up a CI/CD pipeline using a stock GitHub repo that's on my GitHub. So they don't have to write the code. The code works. It's it's a silly application, but the point is that it's a backend / front end application that goes through the CI/CD stages. It has unit tests, it has integration tests, it has a pipeline. So I don't think you need to know how to code so much. You will need code, but you don't have to come up with it. Because you can't say nothing, but you don't have to write the thing you're CI/CDing.
Oh, and I'll definitely recommend GitHub. Is like I feel it's like a treasure chest of so many people's knowledge. Where hopefully that answers the question, Neon. But I feel like there's so many people with so many great projects there which are open source. You're just good enough to just leverage some of that and use that as a building foundation for what this could look like. Although you might have to vet if there's enough documentation, and I mean there are those kind of layers as well, but I'm not going to go into that. So to your point, coming back to the building blocks, so we kind of have 4 buckets that we or 4 pillars where we kind of said, okay, this is kind of what the basic pillars you need to cover. And I feel there's almost a big begs the question as well, because some organizations are awesome, we answered this question, that's good. There's some organization who might have gone, oh, I'm only doing cloud first. Or some people are saying, oh, I've got this. Actually, it's funny. Paul just mentioned over the Bitbucket pipeline with GitHub Actions. There's so many complexity layers to this as well. I'm sure it's unique for every.
Yeah, we could argue about providers all day long, right? I have a friend who swears by Gitlab. Gitlab is the #1 way to do it. Another one, Jenkins is the best.
I feel like it's
offering. I don't like it. I don't like the last changes they did to it, but there's a lot of providers. Circle CI will do it. Travis CI will do it. Team City.
I feel like it's the same as Android versus Apple. It's like you can meet people. They would definitely have separate camps. And one of the hardest calls
versus PHP versus Ruby. We're going to argue.
Oh my God, amount of Slack conversations that I've been part of where people are just deciding to, should we do Node.js or React? What? But then the big secret is we kind of had to go React because we couldn't find developers for Node.js at that point. So we had to go for React. That was like even though everyone decided it's going to be Node.js, but then we couldn't find a developer. And we had to go for a Ruby developer because that's what we could find at that point. But I mean, to your point, is there so if they go cloud native for some of these deployments, and I'm sure they're not mature enough, say as a GitHub or any other provider, which is a source control with all these integrations already there. But is there some thoughts on that? Like, are they easier to start off on, or are you guys using it yourself as well? And do you like it or not like it personally?
So I've used Azure. So Azure Service, for example, is integrated really tightly with Azure DevOps. It's okay. They pushed a recent release to it lately that it doesn't work. It's full of bugs. Had a lot of problems.
Oh, you are one of them.
I used it last night, so I'm like freshly annoyed about it right now that I had to file.
Right.
AWS has an offering as well. It's called Code Deploy.
Yes.
Again, it's fine. You don't always get as much control when you're using those things. So when you're using the cloud service providers ones, they generally tend to work really well if you're all in on just within that cloud. You're doing a language that they primarily support. You don't want to have any weird exception cases or any strange things you want to do. But as soon as you want to customize, usually it's not as easy to do.
Interesting. Yeah. Only when you mentioned that I realized it, because even for people who would have been on the cloud journey for some time, because even with code deploy, code build, they didn't really come up with code build and code deploy like a full-on a better version. They were still beta for a while. So all these people who had been writing code for 20 plus years, they probably should not just drop everything and move it from GitHub to code deploy. Definitely not. But I think you've raised a very interesting point. You probably want to, whichever path you choose, you probably want to look at whether you already have a 20 plus years of code hanging around Do you want to just let go of that and move to probably a bit more restricted world of, because it's not cloud's main business is not doing deployments, right?
They want your money for the hosting.
Yes, that's right.
Incidental, right? It's all incidental to get your code up and running on services they can charge you for.
Yeah, and I think we may have a question over here: GitHub versus GitLab. I don't know if it's a question of what is GitHub versus GitLab, or is there? But for people, is there? What do you see as the difference between GitHub and GitLab? And in case someone doesn't know what they are,
they're competitors. Basically, I don't want to oversimplify this saying they're basically the same thing, but they're very, very similar source control providers that also provide some level of CI/CD system and some level of issue tracking.
And I think
GitLab a lot. So a friend of mine uses GitLab a lot, and I use GitHub a lot. So we have interesting discussions. I definitely can't tell you which one is better. It's going to depend on your
no. That's the question we can't ask. I think the way I've explained it, and you can add on to this as well, Melissa, because GitLab is you can install it, you can deploy it locally inside your environment, whereas GitHub is like a SaaS service as well. There's that separately. Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there you go. Like it was. Don't tell me that was the update last night that you were annoyed by.
No, GitHub had nothing to do. I was annoyed with Azure, nothing to do with GitHub. So I mean,
right.
Okay. By Microsoft, and GitLab isn't. They have slightly different ways of doing things, different pricing models. You know, GitHub is considered the industry leader, so they're a little more expensive. But they provide more services, which you may or may not care about. Because I can't really recommend. It's going to depend on your use case and if you want to self-host or not, and what your budget is, and how many people, and if you're going to be forking. And there's so many. It's not really a wrong answer. Like a generic answer.
I would definitely let Pratap connect with you, and you guys can totally go just guns blazing into this as well. It's like, what is really good? I was going to touch on something else as well. So we talk about the fact that so cloud obviously has limited capability in most cases from a deployment perspective. They're definitely trying to go into that path, but when transitioning, say we spoke about the building blocks, and now if someone's doing 6 months or 7 months deployments and transitioning over to multiple days, or when I've heard of cases where even if a deployment goes in and it fails, but it's still deploying. I don't know if I'm explaining that question correctly, but so if you do rollback, is that still saying, like, how do I explain this? The changes that are going into multiple times in production, are they all big changes, small changes, high risk changes? Is there
changes as small as possible? Right, it's the smaller the better. Right? Big changes are almost always the most dangerous changes, and the bigger they are, the more dangerous they are.
Wait. So what do you do for scaling then? Because it sounds like big changes should go through a manual review, if I can dare to say it.
No, it's not even like that. It's more that you ship big changes. When you're shipping a big change, right, you ship it incrementally, right? Say you've got a dev team and they've got 6 months of working on some huge new feature. With a true CD system, you don't have them hold the whole thing and aggregate it for 6 months and then release like 300,000 lines of code upon the world and everybody screams and wails and, rends their clothes. Instead, you ship it in little pieces, preferably behind some kind of feature flag or some kind of gating, or in some small incremental way that they don't, so that by the time you're done with 6 months, you end up in the same place. You still have the feature shipped, but you shipped 1,000 or 2,000 little like 50 line changes, 100 line changes. And each one of those changes was tested. And then, at checkpoints, as you released enough pieces to make up a major functionality set, then you tested those major functionality sets. But at least you know that you didn't break any existing scenarios, and all the time you've been shipping these little tiny changes. And then you can test the bigger changes together in aggregate to make sure that they're doing what you think they do. So it's not one heroic effort at the end. It's just a lot of very measured and well-tested and secured pieces going out very frequently.
Oh, interesting. So it sounds like, is this a change in behavior in how code is usually developed, or is this more like they need to learn a new different kind of a deployment methodology? Like, so I'm thinking from a developer's perspective. Like, I think I'm a developer listening to this, and like, I have some interest in cloud, obviously doing cloud security, but I'm a developer as well. What does it really mean from like the skill set perspective? So am I these smaller changes that I'm putting in, my IDE is also integrated somehow in doing testing, or like, what does that look like? I mean, and obviously I don't have an exact example. Like, what's the most generic version example that we can go for, I guess?
So it's certainly a mindset shift and a cultural shift for an engineering organization in general, right? Especially if you're one that's used to shipping heroic efforts, and then you've got 3-week-long integration periods, and then you've got bugs flying in and out of the integration periods, and then right, if you're used to these long, massive development cycles, it takes a lot of habit breaking and a lot of retraining to think of how do I break up this, I got handed this big feature, this big change. How do I break that up into small digestible pieces? Some of it is tooling support, right? We need to be able to support being able to run frequent tests, make the changes worth their while. So a big issue I see happening when orgs are first considering this is that their build and test takes an hour. So it's not worth the developer's time to spend 2 hours writing code, put up a 15-line change, and then it takes 2 hours to get a response about if the code is even good enough, right? That nobody wants to do that. So the way I approach it is by making the behavior that I want really easy and making the behavior I don't want really hard. So when I started with my team, I made sure that our builds, that compilation, build, and unit test should never take more than 5 minutes. And I say
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Because most modern languages are really fast, and if they're not fast enough, I just throw a more expensive machine at it, because a high CPU count machine in AWS costs me like $100 a month. How much does a developer cost me? More than $100 a month.
Oh yeah, actually.
So I make sure they get results back in 5 minutes, because anybody will wait 5 minutes. You can wait 5 minutes for something. So that they're not discouraged from doing lots of small, rapid changes, because it's only 5 minutes. And then I made changes to our pull request policy as well, where because the reality is, if you're reviewing other people's changes, the more complex they are, the bigger those changes are, the longer it takes you to review them, and it's an exponential scale. I can review like 50 lines or less in like 10 minutes. It's not that hard. You can get your head around 50 lines of code really easily. 100 lines of code, I can review it in like half an hour. 200 lines of code, it's going to take me hours to get the whole thing through my head, and I'm probably going to miss things. And more than that, I can't get through it. I know that I will miss things, absolutely 100%, because I can't hold the whole complexity of that in my head. I'm sure there's some people who can, but most people, it's not their full-time job. Is not just learning all this, knowing all they can learn about this one change, right? You've got other things going on. Most people can't hold that whole context in their head long enough to provide meaningful review and find, meaningful issues. So I set guaranteed review times. If your change is less than 50 lines of code, I'll review it in the next hour. If your change is more than 500 lines of code, maybe I'll get to you this week.
Oh, that's
encourage
pretty cool.
I made all the tools work really well for small changes. I removed as many roadblocks as possible for small changes, and I made the big changes more difficult. Right? With different requirements, different requirements for checks, different requirements for people's times. And then we encourage a culture of small changes, breaking things up. We made the whole SDLC focus on small changes.
Interesting. By the way, we definitely use a lot of words, and I wonder how many people actually know about the SDLC. What is SDLC? Basically, what is a software development lifecycle, Melissa? Like, what does that really mean for grads over here who are listening to this? And
so what that means is it's the whole way we ship code from the minute that a product owner comes up with a requirement, a need, right? We need to ship this new widget, to the requirements of this is what the widget should do, to the technical aspects of the widgets need to be built in React.js, and they need to have a DynamoDB backend, to breaking that apart into deliverable pieces. Well, first we need to learn how to talk to Dynamo, and first we need to figure out how to make widgets, and then we can make the specific widget we need. To figure out how we're going to test those widgets, right? How we're going to test the connection to our database, and how are we going to make sure that we can test, that widgets show up on a page. Through to deployment, through to to the developer writing code, how the developer writes code, And then how they ship it, how they go through review, right? Who reviews the code? How many reviews does it need? What does review look like? What do we expect to find in review? What are the automated checks, right? What are the security bars it needs to pass? What are the quality bars? What are the monitoring bars? And then how it goes live. And then once it's live, how do we make sure that the widgets are good and our customers like our widgets? How do we make sure the widget isn't killing the performance of our page? We shipped a widget and now our page takes 8 minutes to load.
You know what is funny?
All that is a software development lifecycle.
Yeah, and I love how you explain it, because it kind of also shows you the importance where sometimes security tends to get forget that aspect of it, right? We would and I definitely find myself guilty of doing this in the past, where you talk about changes into, say, oh, this cannot go into production or that cannot go into production, but some changes we're totally fine with, without even realizing that, hey, what this really means is our app is going to load 10 times slower, and the customer experience is going to be really, for lack of a better word, it would not be pleasant. Oh, put MFA everywhere. Yeah, great. We should put MFA everywhere for staff and everything. But does a end user really care sometimes? Like, is there a single sign-on option that we can go for? Like,
most secure box is one you can't log into. But
yeah.
It's useful. That is the thing.
That's right. And I'm finding it like definitely that a lot of people are changing their mindset about this. They're definitely saying, no, there should be a better way to do this, because I mean, at the end of the day, security is still a cost center. We're all all we are doing as security people are, we know what the risk is. We're just making people aware, and we're saying, how do we manage this risk in a way that we don't harm our customers' experience? That's pretty much, I feel like that's the definition of it now these days.
All of software engineering is really risk management, right? What is the risk to our users? What's the risk to our business? What's the risk of not testing this code? What's the risk of spending too much time testing this code? What's the risk of, of not monitoring? What's the risk of deploying once every 6 months versus the risk of putting a bunch of investment to try to deploy every day, and it turns out we can't? Yeah, it's all about risk management.
I think so. And I find it funny, right? Because when people talk about the fact that, oh, security is everyone's responsibility, it is a risk management thing that everyone's looking at. Like every time you deploy something which takes 5 minutes longer, you're risking the customers, you're risking losing customers. There's always you're
risking a major outage, turning a minor outage into a major outage.
Oh my God. I think there was a case, I remember this, someone was talking about this example of theirs where automation is super great, but it's not great if the whole thing takes, like we were talking about a container, which was a 100 MB container.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh my God, that's a massive container to load every time. And they were doing daily deployments as well. And that container would take almost half an hour because all these dependencies and everything.
What?
Yep. Yeah, and it's almost like you're looking at that and this is, by the way, they moved over from a 5-minute deployment window to a half-an-hour deployment window because all the dependencies that got added. So exactly to your point, great idea to add all these features, but if it slows down the entire process, it doesn't really make sense at that point.
Yeah,
what is real value here? So
yeah, having high-level metrics, like having guiding the North Star metrics to keep in mind as you're doing this stuff helps, right? Like that's why I have my 5-minute build time. My build and unit test times, no matter what I'm doing, never switch out over 5 minutes. It's not worth it.
Interesting.
Right. It has to be another solution, right? I can't make primary build and test go over 5 minutes. I can make subsequent jobs, or I can make extra jobs, or I can make optional jobs, but I can't make build and unit tests go over 5 minutes.
Interesting. I love the theory. I'm definitely gonna use it and talk to people, because I feel like, because if we scale this to exactly your point, every 5 minutes for every change that you do, but then if at any given point in time there are 500 changes happening in a company, there's 500 into 5 minutes. It's 2,500 minutes of just like, so that almost like there's so much nuances to it. Like, what does it really mean at scale at that point then? Obviously, there's only one Melissa.
Longer, right? You can absolutely do things that take longer, but you need to do after the initial check. And you need to be selective, right? You need to be really sure that the value they're providing is worth the extra time they're going to take, above and beyond 5 minutes.
Right. And That's a good segue into my next question, because we're gonna talk about Nirvana State, considering you're from Seattle, and I did not know Nirvana's from Seattle. But what's the Nirvana for a mature continuous deployment or mature software development life cycle? Like, what's Nirvana State, and because I imagine a lot of people are somewhere in the beginning stages or somewhere in between. What's Nirvana like?
So Nirvana is like when things happen and nobody knows or cares, right? If you don't know when a deployment happens, and it's not because you don't know anything about them, it's because it doesn't matter. That's Nirvana State. If you don't care that you're deploying in the middle of a huge demo to a huge potential customer, that's Nirvana State. Right? If those things become a non-issue, a non-event, a deployment is just another whatever thing, because you're at no point worried you're going to harm a customer, and you know that even if you were, something were to slip through, it would be caught and handled so quickly that it doesn't matter.
I think the coolest story would be when you're in a customer meeting and you deploy a change straight into production because they said, "Oh, I didn't like the widget that you deployed just before, like 5 minutes ago." Like, "Oh, right, that's okay. Let me just make that change right now." And you make a change, it goes straight into production. I'm like, "Whoa, that would be a super cool
company that's done that.
Oh, really?
That selling point, actually. Yep, they said that to show the strength and value of the deploy, exactly what we just talked about. They were showing off something in the UI, and I think it was an investor meeting, actually. It was an investor meeting, not a customer meeting. And they took it as an example. The CTO was like, "Yeah, let me make a quick change for you here." Did it. Walked them through the process, how quickly the build went, how quickly they pinged somebody, got a PR, got a sign off, and then clicked the button, pushed the whole thing live.
Wow. Yeah,
no,
that to me,
pick up, no blink, no nothing.
That is super cool, though. And I did truly wish everyone kind of gets to go to that path as well, because that's kind of where I feel scalability kind of becomes really not much more than just a dream. It becomes more of a reality at that point, because I feel like a lot of people have conversations where there are certain parts that want to scale, want to do CI/CD, but is there like people listening to this, right? I'm sure they're in different parts of maturity cycle. Like, what do you use as a measure of metrics for how good it is, whether it's quality, or how do you measure maturity? Like, what's your scale?
That's a good question. So it's a couple different dimensions. It's how many deployments can you do in a week, and what percentage of your engineering force is involved in that deployment, right? Can you do a deployment every day, but it requires a quarter of your engineering team, or can you do a deployment every once a week, but it only requires like a dude for an hour, right? So how many deployments and how much of an investment are each deployment? Things like bug return rate, right? How many bugs escape and are found in production by your monitoring tools, and how many bugs escape and are found in production by your customers. It's one thing for a bug to escape in your monitoring tool or whatever immediately, you report it within a few minutes. Something else if a bug goes out in the next week, you get a report from a customer support person telling you that the customers A, B, and C encountered this bug. So there's two very subtly different types of escapes. And then the velocity, right? The velocity of which your development teams can get code out the door, right? Is it increasing or decreasing? I don't care so much about the actual value of the velocity, so much as I care about the delta V.
Okay. And
right? Is it going up? Are you being able to ship code faster, or is it going down? Is it taking you more time?
It's interesting. So quality becomes really important at that point as well, because the more velocity you get, the higher the need to have, I guess, a strong, better quality, I guess, not so strong quality, but better quality.
Quality doesn't mean automated testing. Quality means quality. It means, right, how well is your product filling your user's need? It includes, is your product secure? Is it functionally correct? Are the requirements correct? Is it fast? Is it secure? Is it safe? It's more to it. Like it's not just testing, right? It's not.
I know, and thank you for reminding me, because I before moving into the product space, I had the general description of quality, like the code is secure. Isn't that quality? And like, no, there's a few more layers to it. I'm like,
part of it.
Oh, right. Yeah. I'm like, okay. No, thanks for clarifying that, because I definitely had to be reminded of that. There's a lot more to quality in the development world than you just say. It's not just about shipping secure code. We're kind of towards the tail end of our courses, tail end of our episode as well. We can make it a course if you want, like on deployments.
I've got some courses on it already. You can find them on my website.
Oh, perfect. I love the plug. I'm definitely going to include your website in there because I definitely encourage people to check it out. I've got some fun questions, right? I think only got three of them, not too many. The non-technical as well. So it's more, what do you spend most time on when you're not working on, say, developing code or technology?
So I have little kids, and a puppy who's almost like another little kid. So they consume a lot of time, a lot of time. But even when I'm not writing code, so I do a lot of. I mostly do day to day. I do a lot of engineering management now. I manage a couple of teams of engineers, but I also do a lot of mentorship, especially of underrepresented peoples in tech.
Okay.
So that's between the kids and the mentorship and the management, that eats a lot of time.
Oh, wow. And is there part of mentorship, part of an organization, or you just like helping people who reach out to you?
A little of both. I've done it through a couple organizations. Sometimes my alma mater will reach out for me to help. I did some help with them last week. And sometimes it's just people that I know. I know somebody who knew somebody who said, "Hey, this is a young woman or a young person," and they would like they have questions.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm able to help them more than others. Sometimes it becomes quite in depth. Sometimes I like run in an internship for them, or set them up with an open source repo, or set them up with somebody I know, or have them do mock interviews with them, do resume review, do coaching and mentorship.
Cool. That's pretty awesome, and I think it's really I think it's pretty good. I think we definitely need a lot of that. So thank you. So the second question that I have is, what is something that you're proud of but is not on your social media?
Something I'm proud of that's not on social media. Good question.
A lot of people I know it's often because a lot of people say family. Some people have, like obviously, you mentioned your mentoring services as well. So some people have that as their moment, which they might not openly talk. Because I've not heard you talk about the mentoring part openly. So I kind of assumed as I said that question.
Very much, actually, that would probably be it. I've gotten a number of people into tech.
Yeah.
A number of young women, especially into tech, who didn't think they could do it, who had no idea how to do it. I've gotten a bunch of them now from nothing to tech jobs, to successful tech jobs. I think that's what I'm most proud of. I don't like, it's not my story to tell, right? They did a lot of the work themselves, obviously.
Yeah. But you kind of help guide them as well. Yeah, wow. And that's kind of what because it's funny when you mentioned, I'm like, oh, I think that's my answer to my next question already, right there. So it's like, that's kind of like, oh, last question. What's your favorite cuisine or restaurant that you can share?
Oh, that's a really good question. My favorite cuisine, probably gonna have to go with Thai food. We eat it so frequently now that as much as
or green curry or red curry or pad Thai.
Penang curry or pad ki mao.
Oh wow, I know Penang curry. I don't know what the next one is. What is the second one you said?
Pad ki mao. Sometimes it's called drunken noodles.
Oh right, okay. So I'm totally ignorant. I'm gonna be an ignorant Australian there, even though we should know about Thailand. But sure, I'm gonna Google that after this. I'm like, what are these dragon noodles thing? Because okay, cool. So Thai food.
Yeah, we eat a lot of Thai food here. My kids have dairy allergies, so Thai food is always really safe.
Oh, nice.
And I love Thai food anyway, so now it just sort of become our de facto.
Thai food is definitely great. I love it as well. It's funny. If I were to do a stat of how many people I've interviewed, because we're going to reach the 50th episode soon, a lot of people like Thai food. I probably can definitely have like a catch up for all my guests, and if I serve Thai food, people would be happy. I can be sure because we have that many people who love Thai food.
I like a lot of foods. Like we like a lot of cuisines. We eat pretty internationally, but Thai is just
it seems to have a global love. I think Thai food for sure. So thank you for answering my 3 fun questions as well. I would want to ask, for people who want to reach out to you, where can they find you online to connect with you?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's queenofcode.net. I also on Twitter somewhat frequently, also on Queen of Code. I'm on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is more of a wasteland of recruiters, but sometimes I'm on there too.
It's funny every time I get a recruiter saying, and by the way, they're good recruiters as well. I would not say all recruiters are bad.
Recruiters, there's just so many of them.
Yes, that's right, and I can totally understand that as well. Where and you've got someone who's going to check out your website as well. But I definitely feel it's worthwhile connecting. That people should connect with you, get to know your other side of it, because you've done a lot of talks around the space as well. And a lot of us feel, for lack of a better word, the nirvana would be to be doing multiple deployments a day. Everyone wants to get there, but I love the messaging that you've been trying to get it out there, that it's possible for anyone, even with mature code, to be able to do it as well. I think it's definitely lessons there, and I feel like security kind of would automatically get covered in a lot of ways. If you have a massive test coverage, I think that's what I'm taking away from this. If you have massive test coverage and you're doing the right things, anyone and everyone can be part of this, right?
Everybody can. It's everybody's job to contribute to the effort of shipping code multiple times a day, no matter what your job function is.
Yep.
And some way in software, it is your job to ensure that your software goes live quickly and safely.
Yeah, that's how all of us get paid, right? People shouldn't forget. Yes, we don't get paid by just this is secure. Yeah, this doesn't pay the bills if we just say this is secure. But awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Melissa. I definitely cannot wait to come bring you back again, because I love the perspective you brought in. And I think we definitely can learn a lot from this episode. So I do definitely appreciate all the gems that you dropped into the episode for me.
Yeah, thanks, Ashish. It was great to be here.